Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hessen, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy, AJ Ponciano. AJ,
I'm
how are
doing
you
great. How
doing
about
here
yourself
today?
now?
Doing great as well. We are officially on the final episode of the regular season, really just the entire fantasy season, which is kind of sad. Hard to believe that we're already through here, week 18. We got the whole Sunday slate of games, a lot of big time games here. It's going to be super fun, super exciting, capped off by a tremendous Vikings, Lions, thriller. Winner gets the 1 seed, loser has 14 wins and is the 5 seed, which is just really sad to think about. But it's probably gonna be the Vikings that's gonna get the 5, and that's gonna be hard to watch. So, anyways, today we're gonna be looking at fantasy. We're gonna look at starts, sits, sleepers, and busts for these Sunday games. Obviously, if you guys missed yesterday's show, we did Saturday's slate of games, and today we're gonna be doing Sunday. So, without further ado, go ahead and give me your three
Yeah, so my
starts for the
first one's gonna be
Sunday slate.
Baker. Baker's already came out that he's gonna try to want to get the passing yards for Mike Evans, and we know that they need to go and win this game to make the playoffs. It's between the Falcons and the Bucks right now, and this is a divisional game also for the Bucks playing the Saints, who've been one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. The touchdown to interception ratio has been fine at 17-13. But they've given up just over 4,000 yards, which is the sixth worst so far in the NFL. It's only about 300 yards behind the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's been the worst all year. So they've already said they're going to come out and go give him those yards. Also, Baker Mayfield's playing for a good amount of incentive money. I think if he finishes top five in passing yards and top five in yards per attempt for the season, he gets like an extra like $500,000 or something like that. So a good amount there for him to play for, on top of playing for the final playoff spot, playing for the division. Next up, Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton's going against the Chiefs, who's been good defensively. They're much better on the ground through the air, but middle of the pack on the Bears side, or the middle of the pack against the Chiefs. But the Chiefs are sitting everyone, and this is a must-win game for the Broncos if they want to make the playoffs. On top of that, Courtland Sutton's, he's also playing for incentives. That's what a lot of my guys are based off. It seems like is big incentive guys. I think he needs 60, 70 yards, something along those lines, to get an extra 250,000. Like I said, also a divisional game here against the Chiefs, a game that's a must-win for them to be able to make the playoffs. A lot to play for there, and the Chiefs are basically sitting everyone. Everyone on the offensive side, Mahomes, Kelsey, Pacheco, all those guys seem like they're sitting. I think I saw Trent McDuffie's sitting, also the number one cornerback. They're sitting a lot of their defensive guys also because they already have that number one seed locked up. And lastly, Jonnu Smith. Jonnu really had a really disappointing game last week, all the way up until that final touchdown on that final drive. But outside of that, he's been great all year. I forgot who it is. They're starting or planning to start a different quarterback this week. They're I forgot who even started for them last week. But it's a new quarterback that they brought in or they're planning to start. And honestly, John has really been the only guy who had had much production. I know Tyreek had a lot of targets and he was basically force fed the ball last week. That's why Johnny Smith didn't really get many targets until that final drive and that final touchdown. But I mean, Waddle really hasn't been there all this year. Tyreek, like I said, he was forced by the ball. I want to say he had like his second most targets and like third most receptions all season in this past game. And Jonnu, he had 5, 6 targets, I think, total, 4 catches. He did have that touchdown, which really helped, like I said, at the end of the game. But outside of that, I mean, he's been one of those top guys. I get it, Tua is not starting. But this is also a must-win game for the Dolphins to make the playoffs. They need a lot for them to go right to get into the playoffs. But like even with how bad of season they've had, they're gonna have to rely on those guys like Johnny Smith.
So for me, my first is going to be Sam Darnold. Now, I feel like I haven't talked about Sam Darnold in a lot of these starts, sits, sleepers, and busts, just because I think from the start of the season there was a lot of question marks with Sam Darnold. There was question marks if he was even going to be the starting quarterback. Obviously, now through this point, the season has 4,153 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, with a rushing touchdown on 202 yards and 64 carries as well. The bottom line is it's been a really good season for Sam Darnold. And obviously, as I mentioned, there's going to be a huge game in Detroit. Two teams that have 14 wins. One's going to come out with the 1 seed in the NFC, and on top of that, with the division win, as well as the other team's going to come out with the 5 seed, most likely go to like a Tampa Bay or a Los Angeles and have to play throughout the road on the playoffs. So it's a win or go home type game, and usually in those games, they're big, high scoring affairs. Also, I think the Detroit Lions defense is a little bit overrated. Obviously, they're really banged up, right? You've lost Aiden Hutchinson, you've lost a numerous amount of guys. I mean, I would be here for 10 hours naming all the injuries that the Lions have or have had throughout the season. But their defense is definitely a little bit depleted, and I think Sam Darnold's going to be able to take advantage of that. On top of that, with a high-scoring offense, these are two teams that are going to put up a lot of points. And definitely, if you're in betting, I definitely would bet the over, just knowing that it's going to be a high-scoring affair. Both teams are going to do everything they can to win. And I think Sam Darnold is going to put up another great type of performance in 2 weeks. Previously, 24.7, 22.9 as far as fantasy points are concerned, especially for a guy that wasn't rostered in very many leagues to start the season. This could be a guy that could be a deep sleeper to help win your fantasy league. Secondly, I'm going to go with Bryce Young. Now, Bryce Young's obviously had an up and down year. He's a little bit more of a risky pick as opposed to a Sam Darnold, but he's looked really good in his last 2 games. Has 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, including a rushing touchdown. And he's passed the ball at a very, effective eclipse as opposed to what he did earlier in the season. So I like the matchup here going into Atlanta. I know Atlanta's got a better defense, guys like Caden Ellis, Jesse Bates on the defensive side that could give Bryce Young some problems, but they are missing Chuba Hubbard, who's on IR with an injury. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks got injured again, so I think like Blackshear and Aaron or Mike Boone, I think are their two running backs. The bottom line is they're not going to run the football. They're going to pass the football a lot, especially for a Carolina Panthers team that's continuing to try to develop Bryce Young, trying to get a positive narrative around his name and really carry some momentum moving forward into next season. I think it's a prime opportunity. Again, this is one of those deeper risks, but I mean, he had 16.9 points last week, which is about average. The week before he had 27.1. So he has that ceiling. The obvious part is he also has that really low floor as well. So you could get one of two things, but I think the last 2 weeks he's at least shown a little bit more consistency and trying to carry that momentum going into next year. And then finally, actually not sticking in that game, going to the other game in the NFC South, I'm going to go with Jalen McMillan at home against the Saints. Jalen McMillan, hard to believe, he's only rostered in 43% of leagues. And this is a guy the last 4 weeks has had at least 16 points in his last 4 weeks. On top of that, he has a total of 6 touchdowns in those 4 weeks. He's been finding the red zone, or the end zone, I should say, in the red zone very efficiently. He's the guy that gets most of his production in the second half. I do understand that. So it could be a little bit of a heart attack for your fantasy team. But I think obviously when Chris Godwin got hurt, the expectation was McMillan would kind of step up into that wide receiver 2 role, especially when Mike Evans went down as well. That wasn't the case. Obviously, I think they're playing for something in the NFC South. It's really hard to remember, but I think they're the team in the NFC that can win the NFC South, but they can also find a way to make it as a wild card team. They're the only team in the NFC that can do that. Bottom line is they're going to be going guns a-blazing. As you mentioned, Baker Mayfield's going to try to get Mike Evans the ball. I also think the Saints, defensively know that, and I don't think they would be particularly fun to let Mike Evans, continue that 1,000 reception yard total against them. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Baker. I think there's going to be a lot of coverage on Mike Evans. Not saying that Mike Evans isn't going to get that, but I think that opens the door for Jalen McMillan to have another type of performance. I'm definitely betting that he would get in the end zone. I think he continues to get that 5 reception, anywhere from 50 to 70 yards. And for a guy that's rostered in 43% of leagues, that's an absolute win for you.
So my
What
first
about
set, I'm going to go
sits?
with Devontae Adams. Divisional game here. The Jets are out of it. They don't really want to win necessarily because that would hurt their chances of getting a higher draft pick. Also going against the Dolphins here. I talked about the Dolphins earlier with Johnny Smith, about how they're still fighting for a potential playoff spot or a wild card spot there. One of the things Devontae Adams is a few things. Aaron Rodgers has been really feeding him the ball, and he's been great probably the last 4 weeks. I want to say, was it 5 out of the last 6 weeks? He's a double digit targets, anywhere between 5 to 9 receptions. He's been great these last 6 weeks. But one of the things, Garrett Wilson came out and said that if Aaron Rodgers is still on the roster next year or something along those lines, that he will ask for a potential trade for next season. So I think they're going to try to get him the ball a good amount. Also, Jalen Ramsey, I think, is going to be probably best matchup against Devontae Adams. They have familiarity of playing against each other, and Ramsey knows him a little bit better, know how to play him. And one of the other things Devontae Adams that I kind of thought about is when they trade for Devontae Adams, it was a conditional pick. I think it's a third-round pick that could potentially become a second-round pick if Adams gets over 1,000 yards this year. Adams is pretty close to 1,000 yards, 975. If I was the Jets, I would maybe think about not giving Adams the ball because I would rather keep my second-round pick and only give the third-round pick to the Raiders instead of giving him a second-round pick for Devontae Adams, who's 34 now, 33 now. Yeah, I'd rather keep the extra pick. I'd rather have the higher second round pick than the third round pick if they don't get the ball to Adams. And also Garrett Wilson, like I said, he's very upset. They want him to get him the ball. Wilson's also potentially going to have his first 100 reception season, so they may want to try to help him get that this game. And also, like I said, like Jalen Ramsey's going to be on him for most of the game. In my opinion, this is a big game for that Dolphins defense. They need to go out and really stop the Jets because the Jets could have a really big game, or really good game, or a really bad game. You just never know. And they need some help because Tua isn't starting there, so they need to be able to play their best defense to try to help out whoever's at quarterback there. My next sit is going to be any Chiefs running back. I mean, they're sitting everyone. Carson Wentz uh, is going to be the starter. I think Carson Steele will probably get that starting spot. I think Pacheco's already been ruled out. I think it could be a little bit of Kareem Hunt, a mixture. I think Samaje Perine there is the other running back with Carson Steele. I get it. They don't have anyone else. They're sitting a lot of their guys, but like, just don't start any of them. The Broncos' run defense has been really good all year. They've been one of the top run defenses, and now they don't have Mahomes. They don't have any of their top weapons, and the Broncos really need to win this game to be able to make the playoffs. I think just all type of ways, this game doesn't matter for the Chiefs whatsoever, and it matters more towards the Broncos because they need to go out and win. They need to go out and stop the Chiefs and get another divisional win. Like I think they're 10th in yards given, least amount of yards given up at just over 1,600. They've only allowed 10 rushing touchdowns up to this point. It just doesn't make sense for anyone really on the Chiefs to be starting them. I get it that they'll have bigger opportunities, but it's a game that doesn't really matter playing against a really good defense that needs to win. And lastly, DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift's playing a divisional game against the Packers, who've only given up 12 rushing touchdowns, just over 1,600 yards on the season. Swift does have a good incentive. I think he needs 125 yards ish, right around that range, to get an extra 250,000. So that could be a motivator for him. But on the other hand, like they're playing a really good defense. I get it that the Packers have already clinched their spot, a playoff spot, but right now they're sitting at the 7th seed. If they go out and win and Washington loses, they can move up to the 6th seed and play someone like the Rams instead of playing the Eagles in the first round of the playoffs. So it's not a big deal because they already made their playoffs. But like I'd rather go in and play the Rams than the Eagles in the first round. So like that's in the back of their minds as well. Like this, yes, they've already made the playoffs. Doesn't really matter if they win or lose. They've clinched their spot, but your opponent matters. I mean, the Rams got hot at the end of the year and made the playoffs, while the Eagles have been great all year.
So for me, my first sit is going to be Jordan Love. I think Jordan Love has kind of fallen off the fantasy ranks, especially the last 4 weeks. Obviously, there's been a shift in the Packers' play style. They've really done a good job of running the football very efficiently with Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, some of the other guys that they have there. I think Chris Brooks as well. Jordan Love last week against Minnesota had like 65 passing yards through like the third quarter. And to be quite frank, he probably would have stayed there and not made up to get 14 points if the Packers weren't trailing by 3 possessions, finding a way to come back, getting the yards, a touchdown, things like that. And that's a bit concerning. It's not concerning the fact that Jordan Love is a bad player. I think people are kind of jumping to conclusions that Jordan Love is a bad player. They just haven't really been, throwing the ball deep, or if they are throwing the ball deep, either it's not worked out, has been a completion, or there's been like a penalty kind of offsetting the yards. He only has one game on the year of over 300 yards, and that was actually ironically against Minnesota the week before, where he had 389 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Going into this matchup against Chicago, I'm just a bit skeptical about him. I know the Packers are obviously, I don't really know. I know they're obviously locked into the postseason. I'm sure they've got like different seeding implications, things like that. But regardless, Jordan Love just concerns me for that matter. And on top of that, he provides zero rushing upside, has one rushing touchdown of the year, really has not ran the ball at all to say anything, this year. So I just think Jordan Love at this point is a sit. He's rushing 80% of leagues. He's currently, a high end quarterback too, which in a 12-team league is obviously not going to cut it unless you're in a super flex league, which is the only league that I would consider potentially even starting Jordan Love. Secondly, I'm going to go with Bo Nix. Now, again, Bo Nix has obviously proved me wrong a lot this year, but I think more than anything, this is just going to be kind of a Broncos fall off. I think we were kind of joking about that in yesterday's show about the fact that maybe the Bengals have a legit chance to make the postseason. We are recording this before the game, so we really don't know. But I will say, like, if that does to fruition, everything would line up in the Broncos' favor where they control their own destiny. And regardless, Miami's going to play on Sunday as well, but it would be the most Denver thing, especially this year, for the Chiefs to rest their starters and still find a way to win the game there. And on top of that, the Chiefs defense is very deep, and their whole roster is very deep. There's a reason they've won 2 Super Bowls. You win Super Bowls obviously by having star players, but also when guys go down, having that next man up mentality and having those guys fill in those holes. And I think this will be a low scoring game. Obviously, I don't trust the Chiefs offense that much, but if I think the Chiefs are going to win this game, it definitely would be kind of like a Rams 49ers game where it's 13-9. The offense, just isn't flowing. And, Bo Nix has had 2 great games. Maybe this is a game that he kind of falls off. And regardless if they milk the postseason or not, kind of a game in the step back and one that I'd be avoiding. And then finally, I'm going to go with James Conner. Now, James Conner is banged up. I know he laid an egg last week, 4 carries, 4 yards, 2 receptions, 4 yards. He exited the game against the Rams in the second quarter, I believe, with like a knee injury. Like he kind of like twisted it up on a tackle. Really, had said that he wanted to get back in the game, wanted to keep fighting. Obviously, Coach Gannon didn't believe that he was healthy enough. Obviously at the time of recording, don't know if he's going to be playing or not. Michael Wilson stepped up very nicely as a running back role, which kind of begs the question, would you even consider starting James Conner, regardless, especially if you're out of the postseason contention? I think more than anything, people are, questioning it just because, James Conner might be that running back option with guys like Saquon out, other running backs out. You mentioned Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, things like that. James Conner could be a guy that want to throw in there, especially since he's had 3 great weeks of 22.2, 30.8, and 26.8 before that 2.8 performance. I'm just not trusting it, especially with a guy like James Conner. They may pull the plug entirely, or in the middle of the game, gets banged up once again. You're kind of sitting in a precarious position. I'd be more prone to starting Wilson or any of the other Cardinals backs that would kind of take over that lead role if Conner, was unable to play.
First, I'm
What
going to go
about
with J.K.
sleepers?
Dobbins. Dobbins, as on top of playing for incentives, he has an extra, I think, $250,000 on the table if he gets over 1,000 yards, and then like another 150,000 if he gets a certain amount of like carries or receptions. But the Chargers, they're also playing to win here. Divisional opponent playing against the Raiders, not a good run defense whatsoever. But on top of that, they're playing for a better seed. Right now, they are sitting at the 6th seed, facing up against the Ravens. If they go in and win this game, the Steelers lose, they can move up to the 5th seed to go play someone like the Texans or someone along those lines. I'd rather go face one of those other 9-win teams instead of going against the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. Because, yes, Lamar hasn't been great in the playoffs, but we've seen what he's done all year. I don't expect him to really slow down, especially in the first round of the playoffs. So, yeah, J.K. Dobbins has a lot to play for. He also has a lot to play for to prove that he could stay healthy in a season. That's one of the big things. He's in a contract year. That would also really help him be able to prove they can finish the year strong. Yes, he did miss, I want to say 5 games. He's missed 4 games up to this point with a little injury, but he's bounced back. He's had a good year. I expect him to rely on him a good amount here. Next up, Kenneth Gainwell. Saquon's already been ruled out, so they aren't going for the record. He's not going to get the record. Saquon's been ruled out. Kenneth Gainwell, next guy to step up. Gainwell played a little bit last week, only 3 carries for 4 yards, 1 reception, 5 yards. But like I said, Saquon's out. Kenneth Gainwell is going to get a good amount of the workload there. He's also playing the Giants, who are not a good run defense whatsoever. They have the second worst or they give the second most rushing yards at almost 2,300, 18 rushing touchdowns. Gainwell should be relied on a good amount here. Eagles aren't playing for too much there. They have the 2nd seed. I don't think they can lose the 2nd seed at all up to this point. So uh, they're gonna want to just kind of get the game over with. And Kenneth Gainwell, he can do it all. He can receive. He can rush. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game we see Kenneth Gainwell get 125 total yards and a touchdown. This is very doable for him. And lastly, I'm going to go with Geno Smith. Geno Smith, very up and down year. I always make fun of him because he always has like maximum 2 touchdowns and always has an interception. You always see 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and like 245 yards. It seems like that's a very Geno Smith game. But Geno Smith is playing for incentives here. He's also playing for his job this week. He's at 180 something yards, 190 yards to get an extra 250,000. He also is playing, like I said, he's playing for his job a little bit. Hasn't had a great year. Really only had that one good year, that bounce back year. I want to say it was 2 years ago now. Outside of that, it's just kind of gone downhill a little bit. It just hasn't been great. He's been serviceable, but he needs to prove that he can keep that job or get a job somewhere else. with another team potentially in the next couple of years. I think he has one more year on his contract, but not playing a great team in, in pass defense wise. He's playing the Rams. The Rams, last time they played, I want to say he had 2 touchdowns and interception, had over 300 yards. So he's been good there. I don't expect that to change too much. I don't think the Seahawks can get into the playoffs, but they can really mess up the seeding, I think, for the Rams. Yeah, the Rams has clinched the division. The Seahawks are eliminated, but they could really, like I said, they could really mess up the seeding for the Rams, move them down potentially to the 4 seed to go play a different team. Also, a divisional game. There's a lot of pride in winning those games, even though it doesn't really matter at the end of the year. You want the a kind of upper hand on an individual team, just kind of proving like, yeah, we're out, but you know what? We're still in the same division. We're going to compete week in and week out with them.
My first sleeper is going to be Jalen Tolbert. Now, obviously, I think with the news of CeeDee Lamb, being out for the year, there was more of an emphasis on Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert last week, 3 catches, 30 yards, and a score. Obviously, they're not really playing for anything going into Washington. Obviously, Washington's got more to play for than Dallas. There also are some question marks at the quarterback position. I had seen that, the Cowboys are considering throwing in Will Grier or even Trey Lance to start because they know what they have out of Cooper Rush. Knowing the Cowboys, they might just stick with Cooper Rush, but there could be some uncertainties there at the quarterback position. Regardless, Jalen Tolbert, I think, is going to get the ball a lot, especially if it is one of those new quarterbacks, because they're obviously going to be competing for not only a job in Dallas, but a job in the NFL and really showcasing what they're going to be able to do. Jalen Tolbert, 3 straight games of a touchdown. And for a guy that's, as not rostered in only 8% of leagues, this is the guy that maybe could be a deep sleeper, especially in those deeper leagues. Secondly, I'm going to go with the Titans running backs, and it's going to be Tony Pollard first. Obviously missed last week with an ankle and an illness. If Tony Pollard isn't able to go, I definitely would like Tajay Spears. I think in Dallas or Tennessee, excuse me, Tajay Spears is a guy that the Titans do like. He is listed as doubtful right now, just because he did couldn't hold it in, did hold in a concussion last week. So he is unlikely to play, but in a slight chance that he is able to play, and Tony Pollard is not, I think Tajay Spears is a guy that, again, could have tremendous value for where he's at. And then finally, Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, obviously not really classified as a sleeper. This could be a breakout game of 30, 40 fantasy points, and especially with players sitting out, this could be a guy that could maybe win you a fantasy championship, just as you mentioned with kind of Wayne out of New York, situation like that, he could really be showcasing what he's got and what he's able to do. And I think big reason why he would have success this week.
Jalen
What
Waddle's
about
gonna be
your
the first
bust?
one. Tyler Huntley is the quarterback starting this week, 2 of 2 being out. Huntley started last week, and Waddle. I don't remember if he was injured, if he even played, but from what I can see from the stat sheet, he didn't have a single reception. And Huntley's gonna be one of those guys. He doesn't really extend plays. Once there's a lot of pressure, he kind of just gets out of the pocket. Like I said, also a lot earlier in the episode, last week they force fed Tyreek Hill the ball like throughout the entire game. And Johnny Smith was the second leading receiver there. I think Malik Washington was the second leading wide receiver. He had 4 receptions for 41 yards. Just the ball really didn't go outside of the numbers. And Waddle is going to be one of those guys that looks optimistic that he is going to play. But like I said, once there's a lot of pressure on Huntley, he doesn't really stick back there to make throws. He kind of just starts running around and rushes the ball to himself. So he's someone who I would expect to go after Wall, especially him looking like going to probably be like the third, fourth option for him to go to. He doesn't really get through his reads that well. Next up, I'm going to go with Deebo Samuel. It's just, I don't even know how to explain this year for Deebo. Like, it was either really good or really bad, and we've only seen him be really good like twice this year. Going against the Cardinals, air divisional game, Cardinals' pass defense has been solid this year. They've only given up 18 touchdowns, 7 receptions, 3,600 total passing yards given up. So they're right around like the 14th best in that in pass defense. One of the big things though, Brock Purdy is not playing this game. It is going to be Josh Dobbs. We saw Josh Dobbs come in at the end of that game against the Lions last week. It was another elbow injury for Brock Purdy. He did avoid significant injury, but he's out this week. They're just going to rest him. Niners aren't playing for anything, so Josh Dobbs will be going in and play for him. And lastly, Breece Hall. Breece Hall has been so weird this year. Going against the Dolphins, it seems like this is a team that I picked a lot of guys who I don't like, especially on the Jets side. Breece Hall has just been such a weird year. I thought he was going to be really good and then just kind of got injured, but then also like The offensive line didn't play well. Rodgers wasn't playing well. And going against the Dolphins, who are one of their run defenses, just over 1,600 yards given up, only 12 touchdowns, the top 10 in both of those categories right there on the defensive side. Brees Hall, I just don't see him doing a whole lot. The Jets aren't playing for anything. I'd rather keep him healthy and see what you have in Braylon Allen. I get Braylon Allen has shown off that he's been good all year, but he's still only 20 years old. He's great. I think he's one of those things that there's like, we know what we have in Bruce Hall. He didn't have a great year, but you know what? Braylon's right there. Let's see what he can show out. He's younger. He's a little bit less. He's a little unproven. He's not as known as like Bruce Hall, obviously within the offense. Try to get him going a little bit more. Just kind of protecting your guys, like I said. Plus, Bruce Hall, it's one of those things. His ceiling, it seems like the last couple of weeks has been like 75 yards with like 2 receptions and like maybe a touchdown like once every like 4 to 5 games.
So for me, my first bust is going to be Drew Lock. Now, obviously, Drew Lock coming off the game of his life, 309 yards, 4 touchdowns, 34.36 fantasy points. The biggest thing you got to think about is look at the other games that he's played. Obviously, not ideal. He hasn't been tremendous. Everyone's going to have that one or two breakout games, right? We think of the Tommy DeVitos of the world. We think of the Mike Whites of the world. We even think of the Tyler Huntleys of the world. They all have that one or two breakout games. Although Philadelphia is resting their starters, they are playing on the road. You know, Philadelphia is going to pack that house, watch a lot of young guys perform, and that defense is still really young, and a lot of guys are still going to get the opportunities to play. So I definitely think Drew Lock is a guy that would get back to that, 8, 9, even 11, 12 fantasy points and not have any production this week. If for some reason he does it twice, then maybe the Giants should really consider him being a bridge quarterback next year for whatever rookie they select out of the draft, just because I don't think really there's any rookie. The only one I could maybe think of is Shador. That's NFL ready from week one. I think regardless, the Giants are going to have to take a bridge quarterback, and I think their better bet would be to do a better, more reliable quarterback than Drew Lock. Secondly, I'm going to go with Travis Etienne Jr. Talk about a guy that's been a bust for fantasy managers. 2 touchdowns on the year, and the last one was in week 2 against Cleveland. He's been terrible. 38th position ranked fantasy running back. Last week, he did have, some more carries. Actually had the most of the season for him. 15 carries, 49 yards, but still could not find a way to get into the end zone. That Jaguars running offensive line, even that Jaguars offense is pretty dismal, especially with Trevor Lawrence going down. They are going against Indianapolis, and we did see what Kyle Pitts did. Another disappointing year for him. It seems like these disappointing guys, maybe have find a way to have success in the final week, and that could potentially be the case for Travis Etienne Jr. But I don't think it's even worth the risk at this point. He's a guy that obviously could be in the tier of droppable. He's not. He's in 88.5% of leagues, but wouldn't blow it past you for some reason. You decided to drop him. And then finally, Trey Tucker. I was high on Trey Tucker when Devontae Adams was injured and then traded, but he's been pretty disappointing this year. He did get a touchdown last week, 2 catches, 24 yards, and a score. But again, not a guy that I'm really thinking um, that's really going to make an immediate impact from the get-go. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are a bit skeptical about this Raiders team, especially that wide receiver core. But again, going into that matchup against the Chargers, he hasn't had more than 2 receptions in like 4 weeks. And I think some people might take a dart at him, especially if some of their other guys in their roster sit. But I took a dart at him a while ago. It didn't really work, and I've kind of been scarred since. So thank you guys for listening to another episode here in the Truth. Thank you guys for listening to a full slate, a full fantasy season. We really do appreciate it. We got some fun things in store, including some fantasy baseball podcasts that will show up in a couple of weeks. We are taking a couple of weeks off as far as an off season per se is concerned. So be on the lookout for that. We will come back with football podcasts in the future, probably after the fantasy baseball, at least the preseason of that aspect too, kind of change it up a little bit here. But we really do appreciate the support. We appreciate you guys tuning in each and every week. We hope to see you guys in a couple of weeks. If you guys did enjoy it, as always, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter. The Truth as we want to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focused memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports, AZ, and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON 15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, what you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.